Ever heard of a house so haunted it swallows people whole? This isn't just a tale spun to scare children or a ghost story told around campfires. This is the chilling reality of the House of Unseen Visitors, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurs, and where the brave or foolish who dare to enter may never return. For decades, those locals have whispered about this house. It's not just the creaking floors or the cold drafts that send shivers down your spine. It's the phantom touches that brush against your skin when no one is there, the whispering voices that seem to come from the walls themselves, and the ever-present feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Meet the House of Unseen Visitors. This Victorian mansion, once grand and opulent, now stands as a decaying monument to the unknown. Its windows, like hollow eyes, peer out into the night, and its doors, heavy and foreboding, seem to groan under the weight of the secrets they hold. For decades, locals whispered about it, phantom touches, whispering voices, and the feeling of being watched. The stories are endless. Some say they felt a cold hand on their shoulder, only to turn around and find nothing. Others claim to have seen shadowy figures flitting through the rooms, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. The feeling of being watched is the most common experience. It's as if the house itself is alive, its walls imbued with a malevolent consciousness that observes and judges every move you make. Few who have entered have returned to tell the tale, and those who have are forever changed, their eyes haunted by what they've seen. Few return to tell the tale. The road leading to the house is often shrouded in mist, and the house itself looms like a dark sentinel waiting for its next victim. It's a place that calls to the curious and the brave, but also to the desperate and the lost. Kira, a thrill-seeker, ignored all warnings. She was drawn to the house by a combination of curiosity and a desire to prove herself. Armed with just a flashlight and her smartphone, she was determined to document her experience and uncover the truth behind the legends. With just a flashlight and her smartphone, she entered those creaking gates. The iron gates, rusted and heavy, groaned in protest as she pushed them open. The path leading to the house was overgrown with weeds, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. She entered those creaking gates. The sound echoed in the still night, a foreboding reminder of the countless others who had passed through before her, never to return. The house loomed ahead, its dark silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. Inside, the air was thick, the darkness suffocating. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing in the light and exhaling darkness. The walls seemed to close in around her, and every step she took was accompanied by the creak of old wood and the rustle of unseen things. Dust swirled in her flashlight's beam. Her footsteps echoed, but they weren't alone. She could hear other footsteps, lighter and quicker, as if someone or something was following her. The air grew colder with each step, and the sense of being watched intensified. "Hello?" she called, voice trembling. No answer. The air grew colder. She could see her breath in the beam of her flashlight, and the silence was oppressive, pressing down on her like a physical weight. She called out again, louder this time, but the only response was the echo of her own voice. Faded portraits lined the walls, their eyes following her. Her flashlight flickered. The faces in the portraits were stern and unyielding, their eyes seeming to bore into her soul. She felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that the eyes seemed to move, tracking her every step. In the grand dining room, the air was even colder. The room was vast, with a high ceiling and a long table that stretched almost the entire length. The walls were lined with more portraits, and the chandelier above was covered in cobwebs, its crystals dull and lifeless. A decaying feast lay untouched. The table was set with fine china and silverware, but the food was rotten and covered in mold. The smell was overpowering, a sickly, sweet stench that made her gag. She covered her mouth and nose with her sleeve, trying to block out the smell, but the figures around the table, they weren't mannequins. A chair scraped. The figures were dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their faces pale and lifeless. As she watched, one of them turned its head to look at her, its eyes empty and soulless. The chair scraped again, and she realized with horror that the figure was trying to stand up. A man with hollow eyes and jagged teeth smiled at her. His smile was wide and unnatural, stretching from ear to ear. His eyes were dark pits, and his teeth were sharp and uneven. He took a step towards her, and she could see the madness in his eyes. Kira stumbled, her flashlight clattering to the floor. The beam of light wavered and then went out, plunging her into darkness. She scrambled to pick it up, her hands shaking. She could hear the man's footsteps getting closer, and she knew she had to get out of there. When she looked again, they were gone. Panicking, she bolted. She ran through the house, her heart pounding in her chest. Every room she entered seemed to be a dead end, and the walls seemed to shift and change, trapping her in a maze of darkness and fear. The hallway stretched, shadows closing in. "She's here." The voice was a whisper, barely audible, but it sent a chill down her spine. The shadows seemed to reach out for her, their fingers long and claw-like. She could feel their cold touch on her skin, and she knew she had to keep moving. A cold hand gripped her shoulder. She screamed and spun around, but there was no one there. The handprint on her shoulder was icy cold, and she could feel the chill spreading through her body. She stumbled backwards, her mind racing with fear and confusion. She screamed, and darkness swallowed her. The darkness was thick and suffocating, pressing in on her from all sides. She could feel it wrapping around her, pulling her down into its depths. Her screams echoed in the void, but there was no one to hear them. Weeks later, Kira was never seen again. The house stood silent and empty, its secrets hidden behind its decaying walls. The locals whispered about her fate, but no one dared to enter the house to find out what had happened to her. Some claimed to hear her screams from the mansion, but no one dared check. The house had claimed another victim, and its hunger was sated for now. But the whispers continued, and the legend of the House of Unseen Visitors grew. Months later, teenagers found her chair. They had dared each other to enter the house, their bravado masking their fear. They found the chair in the grand dining room, covered in dust and cobwebs. It was as if it had been waiting for them. Kira, lifeless, dressed in antiquated clothing, staring ahead. Her eyes were empty and her skin was pale and cold. She was dressed in a gown that looked like it belonged to another century, and her hair was styled in an old-fashioned way. It was as if she had become a part of the house, another ghostly figure trapped in its walls. The unseen visitors had claimed another. The house stood silent and empty, its secrets hidden behind its decaying walls. The locals whispered about her fate, but no one dared to enter the house to find out what had happened to her. The unseen visitors had claimed another. The house stood silent and empty, its secrets hidden behind its decaying walls. The locals whispered about her fate, but no one dared to enter the house to find out what had happened to her.